Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to move on today looking at some special selections, which is where some of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Josie, Gal by Oxbow. No other context than that, however there is an exclamation mark, which looks pretty good to me. There's some excitement there. Uh, Excitement's always good, especially when it comes to a specific song you'd like me to check out. I figure that means that there's something interesting about it, or at least it means something to you. We're going to dive into this, see what's going on with some Oxbow.
Told me to please not cry, 'cause I didn't want to see why I cry, and only little girls cry. Maybe that's what I was. He said he thought I was a girl, and there was only one way to find out. And if you want,
Very percussion led, tense. It's a really nice bass presence here centered in the mix. There's a lot of pain in the vocals. I don't think I need to state that, but All right. The first minute of that I found rather difficult to listen to. It's exceptionally quiet, isolating, heavily focused on the vocals, which are delivered in a very vulnerable style that slowly shifts into more distortion and compression until it reaches a point of, as I mentioned, pain. And that's sort of the de facto state the vocals stay in from that point forward. The song operates between two modes. One is more driven with a wider instrumentation. We have the guitar, the bass, and the drums, and another one that has the same instrumentation but is just a bit narrower. I think there is a volume differentiation. I wasn't looking at the volume throughout most of that, and I probably should have been. Um, but the section just feels quieter, smaller. It feels timid compared to the more bombastic chords that we get out of the guitar and that really large bass tone we hear in the middle with the full drum kit. There is this back and forth here that is pretty typical for any sort of contrast you're going to create in music. Have a quieter section, have a larger section, but here it feels more than just like a compositional choice to me. There seems to be some sort of narrative component to it. The vocals also move back and forth between these where they're quieter and raspier. The harsh vocal that we get bouncing between them, whereas the emotion doesn't always change. There's still that fear. It's still driven by a feeling of smallness. Uh, Maybe lacking power, I think, is a better way to describe the vocal delivery. And so, like I mentioned, the song is difficult for me to listen to. There's some sections that I think come across a little, what should be the phrase for this? They're more listenable. They deviate a little bit from that pain and vulnerability in a way that doesn't completely absolve them. It's still in the chord progression, so to speak, but what we end up hearing is just a chord progression and a bass line and drums. And so without the vocals in those moments, it it lightens the mood just ever so slightly enough to create something that is a bit more palatable is a really weird word to put there, but I suppose it's accurate. It makes it easier to listen to. And that's primarily the whole song. Our chord progression doesn't change, the emotion doesn't change. We just have movements from quiet vulnerability to loud vulnerability and back and forth. I think what elevates this track is timbre. The bass tone is solid, but the production on the drums feels a bit lacking. The bass kick has some punch, but I honestly think that's to do a little bit more with how the bass guitar plays alongside it. The rest of the drum kit sort of feels lo-fi in its production. It doesn't have that crisp sound you would expect from, say, a radio rock band or a progressive rock or metal group. Um, it has a bit of that fuzzy blurriness to it that I expect more out of indie rock. The guitar shares that same thing over on the right side. Also, the guitar is pushed off to the right, which I think is interesting. Usually, in a lot of rock setups, the guitar is going to be center, unless you have dual guitars and then you separate them to create that balance. But here we don't. We just have it off to the side by itself. But it also carries with it a type of fuzzy blurriness to it and a ton of low end. It is certainly designed to feel more like a large blanket than a cutting knife. It's not designed to pierce through the sound and deliver a melody. It's there to envelop the listener in a mood, and I think it absolutely does that with its warm, orangey, fuzzy vibes. Um, and all of this paints a very solid picture of the song. It has a very unique sound to it. And none of this brings into account, I think, the most important timbre here, which is the vocals. It's not just the delivery of them, especially in the more um, frantic, exasperated, panicked delivery, but even outside of that, when there's no words being spoken, but there's a vocal part. And it's the little chitters and clatters and sounds coming out of the mouth. It's vocalization not in a way of oohs and ahs that are musical, but just sounds coming from someone. It puts everything in a very specific perspective, almost as if this person is uncontrollably doing these mouth sounds. I don't know what to take in all of it. I have no idea what most of the lyrics were. They were sort of unintelligible to my ears, but it is a frightening story, and I'm a little afraid to dig into the lyrics on this one. But I think that's all I have to say on it. It's fairly one note. It does what it, that one sort of very vulnerable sound very well. We have a quiet and a loud version of that, and the vocals are sort of the key to unlocking everything. The rest of the instruments certainly set a specific atmosphere, but it's not an atmosphere that is totally unique to this track. It's the vocals that really elevate everything and create something different here, whatever that different may be. So I guess let's hit some lyrics. The story of the lyrics speaks about a traumatic event for our narrator. They were tied up to a pole, and upon beginning to cry, the person who tied them up asked if they were a girl, because only little girls cry, and said there's only one way to find out. So he assaulted our narrator and then pulled their pants down. And he says at the time, he said, I thought the clock would never stop. Cried out for another chance, asked God for another chance, but God only watched. Interestingly, the final line is a boy got lost and a girl found their way that day. Being that the song is about a traumatic incident, I'm curious what that final line means. It could very easily be read in a trans perspective. They realized that while they were born a boy, that that's not who they were, and that this was the event that unlocked it. But that seems like a really tragic backstory for this moment of discovery. And while I'm sure that it is something that happens, it breaks my heart, in if from a certain perspective. I mean, the whole thing, regardless of if that's how it ends, is heartbreaking to begin with, especially the way that it's all delivered as well. I read up on the band, And it doesn't seem that anybody in the band is trans, which doesn't mean anything. It's just very, very rarely do I hear any music about transitioning or the process of trans, or even the process of realization from cis bands or bands that only have cis members. And it also comes from 1995, which makes me think that both the noisiness of it, the abrasion of the music, the overall sound of it, and even the lyrical topics were, at least from my understanding of 95, which is mostly secondhand. I was alive at the time, but I was just a child. I didn't know much about the world, didn't know much about what was going on, but this seems exceptionally counterculture. Even counter to what I thought would have been counterculture at the time. Very niche underground stuff going on here. Yeah, this is just a very difficult listen overall, and I'm curious. The album is also called Let Me Be a Woman, so there's another trans element there. I don't know. Let me know your take on this. I mean, the first, 95% of this I think is rather straightforward. It's just recounting a traumatic event. I think it's really that last line that I'm kind of curious what people's perspectives are, or more importantly, I think if Oxbow has ever made an announcement or an interview or whatever, released information about what it's supposed to be about. Is this specifically a track about a moment of trans discovery in somebody that just happened to be tied to an extremely traumatic moment in their life? Those are my thoughts on Gal by Oxbow. As I said, let me know your thoughts on this track in the comment section, perspectives, opinions, your read on it, if you enjoyed it, any of that stuff, put it down there. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps up for this one, though we do have two more special selections today. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.